Earlier in the day, the Digital Data Protection Bill 2023 was tabled in Parliament, and joining us right now is Minister of State for Information and Technology, Rajeev Chandrasekhar. Rajeev, thanks so much for taking time out to speak to us on this. While it's been a much delayed bill, something that's been waiting on and something that could become the core pillar or foundation on which digital laws and digital frameworks are evolved in this country, there are serious concerns that have been raised about the bill. Did it require more scrutiny before it was brought into Parliament?
No, I certainly don't think that characterization is appropriate. I think the bill, as you know, has a long history. There has been a lot of discussion and debate about the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill in its earlier avatar in the JCP, the Joint Committee of Parliament, and when that bill became very unwieldy and very complex, the bill was withdrawn and we went back to the drawing board to create a much more modern, much more nimble and a future-ready framework, a legislation that would protect the citizens' rights very adequately and emphatically. And we went through extensive, very, very deep consultations, which is a signature for most legislations and rule making that we do in the cyberspace. And there have been hundreds and thousands of people who have been involved in the process of developing this legislation. So I think these characterizations of requiring scrutiny, not having enough inputs, etc., are unfortunately misfounded and are not fully clear about the facts and the history of how this legislation has been developed.
As you point out, it has gone on for many years now. Give us exact details of the final changes that have been brought in the bill that has been tabled in Parliament, because there have been several drafts and there have been concerns over whether the final changes that have been added to it, whether there has been enough discussion on it. What are the final changes that have been brought, Rajeev?
No, I don't think it's easy for me to in a 5-minute, 10-minute interview describe a legislation that is so important. I can certainly give you and share with you the basic principles around which this legislation has been built. The goals of the legislation are very, very clearly articulated in the preamble of the legislation. It aims to protect very clearly the fundamental right of privacy that has been declared a fundamental right by the Supreme Court in 2017. As you know, I was one of the petitioners who fought for that fundamental right finding of the Supreme Court. So it protects the rights of the Indian citizens as far as digital personal data is concerned. It casts pretty significant, serious obligations on all companies that deal with the personal data of Indian citizens in terms of what their obligations are vis-a-vis data minimization, purpose limitation. They cannot use it for anything other than what it is being sought. They cannot store it for much longer than it has to be used. So there is a whole series of principles there that make this legislation very, very modern and future ready, and addressing both the ability for our startups to continue to innovate on one hand, and on the other hand, giving the Indian citizen the fundamental right to protection of his or her data that he or she deserves.
Right. I'm just going to take specific concerns that have been raised, Rajeev, and you can respond to them. The first concern has been regarding the RTI Act. It's been widely discussed and written about. What is your response to those who say that it limits it restricts the scope of the RTI Act and expands the scope of bringing all data, all personal data exempt from revelation?
No, Virag, I think I would not want to go into a clause-by-clause discussion today, excepting to say again what I said outside the Parliament is that, look, I think this is an important bill. It is something that, if enacted, will protect the citizens from the misuse and exploitation of the personal data, and there should be a nice, proper, robust discourse and debate in Parliament about all of the imaginary or real concerns that the opposition parties or indeed any MP has, because this is an important legislation. I would prefer that this debate happens No, 1 second, Viraghan. I would prefer that the debate happens on the floor of the House rather than doing it on a TV studio. There are certainly many concerns that were raised at the introduction stage itself, which is mystifying to me, because I think the right way to do this is to introduce the bill and then get into a debate and lay out all of the concerns or the infirmities or weaknesses as you see it, or as an opposition MP sees it. Most of them, I can assure you, once we get an opportunity to respond to these concerns, will be shown to be non-concerns, because including the RTI, the right to information is certainly not the right to personal information. So therefore, there has been absolutely no dilution of the right to information. All it does is reinforce that the personal data of every Indian citizen is subject to his or her consent and cannot be used or misused by anyone without his or her consent. So that is the limited purpose of any change in the RTI formulation, if any. But the power of the RTI, the law of the RTI, the scope of the RTI remains unchanged.
Okay, I take the point that you'd like this to be discussed point by point in Parliament and not in a television channel, but yet I'm just going to raise two other concerns and you can respond or clarify on this. One is, as far as the Data Protection Board is concerned, the powers that the centre has in terms of constituting it, and the other is in terms of the powers in the hands of the centre to just issue a notification which can exempt a government or a private entity. These are two concerning aspects that tends to weigh the balance in favour of the centre, and that's been raised again. What is your response to it?
No, they're absolutely, I think it's not fair to characterize the formulation and the design of the Data Protection Board as anything but an independent adjudication body that will adjudicate the consequences of data breaches or indeed breaches under the law. We have to give it a full detailed reading to understand the thought behind it, and I hope this is part of the debate in Parliament. On the issue of the second point you raise again, excuse me?
In terms of notifications to exempt private entities.
And So I think, no, I got that. I think again, the exemptions to government or any entity are exemptions that have been very carefully carved out and designed. As you know, this is privacy and data protection is a fundamental right. Every fundamental right has reasonable restrictions to it. The right to free speech is not an absolute right. The right to privacy is also not an absolute right. And so therefore there are reasonable exceptions in the event of national security, in the event of terrorism, in the event of a pandemic, in the event of an earthquake, etc., etc. So I think people are, I think either it's deliberate or it is unwittingly, wittingly or unwittingly, people are deliberately reading maybe a sentence and trying to create a narrative around that. And the best way, in my opinion, to really have this understood is a full and robust debate on the floor of the House, where every concern and indeed every issue can be raised and answered by the government in a responsible manner.
Right, important point that you make there, Rajeev. Given the atmosphere in Parliament right now, do you believe that something of this nature, which is very close to you, personal to you, something you worked on for many years, will get the time of debate and go beyond political partisanship to have, an evolved digital regulatory framework?
No, absolutely. I think the rate at which our digital economy is growing, our technology and innovation ecosystem is growing, it is clear that our citizens deserve, all Indian citizens deserve this type of digital personal data protection bill, and I'm hopeful that we will have the opposition and the government participate in a debate and conclude and enact this law, which is so important for the orderly growth of our digital economy and the technology and innovation ecosystem, with the consumers and digital nagriks at the heart of it.
In terms of the foundation that this lays, Rajeev, you've pointed this out in social media as well, platforms. This is really the foundation in terms of which you're building the economy. Maybe it doesn't take the news or the media focus as, a Delhi ordinance bill gets at the moment, but in terms of building the digital economy, this could be an essential step forward, right?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely believe this and the other legislations that Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has conceived as global standard cyber laws that will in a sense be the envelope, will be the guardrails, will be the catalyst of our $1 trillion digital economy, of opportunities, of jobs, investments, always keeping consumer and citizen rights at the heart of it. This is certainly a very important piece of the overall framework of legislation that are being developed, and the consumer rights and citizen rights have always been at the heart of what our government does, that regardless of how we expand the economy and which direction the economy expands, the citizen's rights to his or her fundamental rights and other rights in the ecosystem must always be protected.
Right. Thank you so much, Rajeev. We hope that debate in Parliament will bring about, perhaps evolve. And last word before I let you go, do you believe that there should be concessions in the interest of consensus?
Concessions in the interest of?
Consensus in Parliament on this issue? Concessions in the interest of consensus in Parliament in this issue?
On the issue of DPDP?
That's right.
No, look, this is not an issue of concessions. This is not an issue of give and take. This is about creating a legislation that's the best legislation for our people. There are 1.2 billion Indians that are going to be on the Indian internet by the year 2025, and they certainly deserve a world-class piece of legislation, and certainly we are prepared to sit with all of the opposition MPs and sit together and build this world-class piece of legislation if we haven't done it already. I certainly think that we've already done a fantastic job in this legislation, but if there is more to add, we are certainly open to listening to it.